Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the 2021 Africa Liberty Forum. Although our event is coming to a close, I hope you are leaving us feeling inspired and well prepared for the path forward towards achieving your goals. After participating in the events this past 2 days, I see so many reasons to be hopeful for a more prosperous future in Africa. Thank you all uh, that you do. Thank you for all that you do and for participating in our program. I also want to pause to give yet another thank you to the sponsors of our regional liberty forums, the John Templeton Foundation, Smith Family Foundation, Templeton Religion Trust, Freda Otley Foundation, Thomas W. Smith Foundation, and Sarah Skife Foundation. Thank you for making these important exchanges and engagements possible. But before we move into the final discussion of the day, I have an exciting announcement. The awaited winner of the 2021 Africa Think Tank Shark Tank competition. So earlier today, we saw our contestants Rejoice Ngwenya from Komaliso in Zimbabwe, Henry Kwam from Careful Policy Institute in Cameroon, and Bruce Villon in Bingura from Center for Development and Enterprises Great Lakes in Burundi make their pitches to a panel of judges. Well, our judges have deliberated, and we have a winner.
As judges, we were confronted with a difficult task because the presenters had delivered very powerful, awesome, excellent presentations, both in terms of content and also in terms of quality. It's been a painful discussion, painstakingly slow process to arrive at a decision. And so we're pleased to announce that Rejoice Ngwenya of Komaliso, which stands for the Coalition of Market and Liberal Solutions, we announce him to be the winner. Congratulations to him.
Thank you, Temba. We are ending the event talking about a topic that is so very important to me, human rights in Africa. There is hardly any topic that unites Africans, both on the continent and its diaspora, more than the issue of the right to personal freedoms. I'm talking about the right to treat people fairly and to be treated fairly, the right to be happy, and simply the right to be an African. We may have weathered the horrific episodes of human rights violation under military regimes in the 1960s until the 1980s, but we certainly still have, and pretty much still live under governments who are in no way different from the military dictators in how they treat human rights. We simply have tyrannical systems that are built by dictators, but packaged and sold to us as democracies. From the calls to end police brutality in Nigeria, to those against corruption in Zimbabwe and ethnic marginalization in Cameroon, there has never been a time when Africans have fought against a collective enemy since the end of colonialism than we have against human rights abuse in the last 2 years. We are now well into the new millennium. It's 2021 already. But as we approach the end of this decade, there cannot be any disregard of the question of how Africans must guard their rights amid their clamor for prosperity. I mean, what good is money when the hands and legs are in chains? The 2020 is no doubt a definitive decade for Africa. What happens right now in this decade as we manage an incredible surge in population, the effects of climate change, and an audacious continental free trade agreement amid the human rights question will all determine how good the 21st century treats Africa. Well, with that, I would like to welcome three amazing individuals to this discussion. Martin Van Staden, a legal and policy consultant for the Free Market Foundation and the independent business community, Sakaliga, both in South Africa. Faye Shade Charles Adeyemi, founder of the Chale Institute, a senior fellow at African Liberty and lecturer at Elizade University in Nigeria, and Rejoice Ngwenya of the Coalition for Market and Liberal Solutions in Zimbabwe. Gentlemen, it's my honor to have you join us for this important conversation. But I want to start off straight up with Rejoice. You are in Zimbabwe, and your organization, Komaliso, have been doing really amazing, particularly under the regime of Robert Mugabe. And if I can recall, one of the things you often press so hard is about the Constitution itself, the Zimbabwean Constitution, and how the Constitution gave a lot of leeway for Mugabe to abuse power and to consolidate power for those decades that he was in power. And I do understand that the Zimbabwean Constitution has its origins in the military days. I think, of course, this resonates across the continent of Africa as well. But do you think we need to change constitutions in Africa, considering majority of these constitutions were either designed by military boys or some of them were even inherited under colonialism? For instance, Nigeria's constitution is still a reflection of colonial rule and the military days. So from the Zimbabwean example, do you think we need to review constitutions in Africa? Or if we do not, how do you think we can update our constitutions to accommodate new challenges and new realities of the continent? Because the question of human rights itself boils and rises and falls on the Constitution. Rejoice.
Well, thanks, Ibrahim. Look, I think there is, empirical evidence, Ibrahim, that civilizations can survive without constitutions. I mean, statutes can actually control the way governance is managed. Now, our problem then in Africa is that we have canned democracy. In other words, we have this belief that a constitution by nature has to be good, but it can be bad constitutions, because constitutions are generally designed for good people. In other words, they are supposed to be a tool with which you impart your governance on a nation. Now, so if a constitution, for instance, Zimbabwean constitutions, they have always been very dicey. We've lived under a religion constitution and all that. But I think when we design constitutions in Zimbabwe, we design with the impression that they are going to be implemented by good people. So what it means, Ibrahim, is that perhaps Africa is not very good at using constitutions to govern. We need possibly to think of ways in which we can uphold certain critical norms that are necessary for human beings to survive without oppression. So I have my doubts, Ibrahim, that constitutions in Africa work, because we have had 2 or 3 constitutions, but still they create so much room for oppression and abuse. They've been bastardized, and I'm not quite happy with the African constitutionalism side of it, Ibrahim.
Well, I think my friend Martin may differ from that because he's a legal practitioner in South Africa. So, Martin, what do you think about that? Do you think constitutions have failed Africa, or do we need constitution, or do we not?
Oh, thanks, Ibrahim. I think I agree in large part with Rejoice in that on Africa, we have failed the project of constitutionalism, although I think we still have much to gain from constitutionalism. And I think a big issue is that we have, to an extent, really imported the worst of the worst from the West. We've looked to the United States, for instance, and thought, wow, look at how well their constitution has served them. Let's take a carbon copy of that and paste it onto Africa. And many African states have adopted the strong executive power constitution of the United States model, and that has had predictable results. We did not have the same culture of constitutionalism that the United States had. That is why I think in Africa, in our context, it takes a lot more experimentation, which we haven't done much of. We should look to models like the Swiss system with very, very intense decentralization, a rotational executive, for instance, the Taiwanese constitution, which doesn't have 3 branches of government, but 5, a far more dispersal of power. And I mean, that comes down to creativity. And in South Africa, we seem to think we have one of the best constitutions in the world, and I am certainly a big fan of our constitution. But to a great extent, it is also simply based on a largely British model made for a British society, and not for a society like Africa, where abuse of power is unfortunately rampant, and where that needs to be taken into account. We cannot make constitutions for saints like Nelson Mandela. We need to make constitutions assuming that the very worst amongst us are going to be the people who govern us. And for that, we need a new approach, a far more skeptical approach, a far more cynical approach, unfortunately. And that, I think, will go a long way to balancing power and checking the excesses of power. But with the current class of political leaders, I'm not sure we're going to see that. So a lot of the work comes down to the people represented at this conference to really pressure and become influencers in our respective societies.
Yeah, I think I very much agree with what you're saying. Constitutions can bring the best out of people, and of course, it can always bring the worst out of people. It depends on the kind of constitution you're operating with. But I still want to stay with you, Martin, and this is going to be about how the constitution in South Africa has paved the way, or should I say, accommodates the idea of disregarding property rights. And I'm specifically talking about first the nationalization of properties we've seen in South Africa. Of course, the EXCOM is a classic case. It's a state agency that has failed massively. And of course, about the expropriation without compensation policy. These are policies that the government, the ANC government, has promoted on the basis of the Constitution itself. So what that means in a larger sense is that the Constitution could be a guiding principle for, or that guiding document for the country, but it is not a perfect document, as we've seen by the virtue of the EWC and the nationalization policies. But how do you think that we can update the South African Constitution to accommodate new realities and new challenges to better the lives of South Africans without necessarily losing the bigger picture or the idea, the beautiful idea the Rainbow Constitution presents?
Yeah, so we came out of apartheid very strong. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, go on.
We came out of apartheid very strongly with our constitution, a very inspiring liberal democratic document that entrenched, most importantly in my view, the right to property, something that many constitutions omit nowadays because of new ideas about the proper role of property in society. But South Africa did have a very strong property rights provision. We did not learn all the lessons that we could from the apartheid regime. So ESCOM, the power utility, was created in the 1930s. It's not a product of the new democratic government, but very much a product of the old authoritarian apartheid regime. And we kept it just like that. We also kept a nationalized airline and various massive state-owned entities that represent a massive drag on our economy and a cash cow for corrupt politicians to extract wealth from society. And all those things, of course, need to be privatized. But expropriation without compensation, and I know the international community took some interest in this a few years ago when President Donald Trump tweeted about it and said that his government was going to look into it, and there was a bit of excitement about it back then. But that's still on the agenda. It didn't fall away. We seem to be on the cusp of having our constitution amended, which will take away the unqualified right for property owners to be compensated when government seizes their property, expropriates or engages in eminent domain, and replaces that with a regime where government can take it without paying anything under a power that is discretionarily exercised by ministers. So that represents a huge problem. And if the Constitution is amended to allow for confiscation of this kind, it will represent a massive setback in South Africa's constitutional project. And in that way, the Constitution will, in a way, become more of a burden than it is an asset. So I think more directly to your question, how can constitutions, and the South African Constitution in particular, be improved to stop a situation like this? And that might be to entrench certain rights against any amendment, rather than simply saying that you need a larger parliamentary majority, but entrench the right to property and say that South Africans have suffered far too long under non-property regimes, being deprived of their property, being dispossessed by government en masse, and say that you cannot take that away. It's an absolute human right, and do that for various other aspects of the Constitution, and that will go a long way to improving South Africans' lot.
Right. I mean, property rights is indeed one of the cardinal aspects of any given constitution, and of course, you guys are so lucky to have that provision in your constitution in South Africa. And the remarkable thing is that even a constitution that was developed under pretty much a democratic system like South Africa has is still not the perfect constitution. So not to make mention of constitutions like that of Nigeria, and I'm going to come to you, Feishade, constitution that was pretty much developed under the military government. The 1999 constitution is pretty much obtainable in the country. And of course, in early June 2021, we saw the president of your country, my country, ban Twitter because he was so outraged by the fact that Twitter censored one of his posts that was pretty much talking about genocide, promoting genocide in some way. And of course, in retaliation, he banned Twitter in the country. And this has created a constitutional crisis in the country because, of course, it violates Section 22 and 39 of the Nigerian Constitution, if I recall, which, of course, laid the foundation for the right to communicate and the right to express your feelings. But again, the president or the presidency has used the argument of protecting the corporate existence of the country, which of course is constitutional to ban Twitter. That in itself is a constitutional problem, a philosophical problem within the Constitution itself. One aspect of the Constitution negating the other. But generally, we know it's a cynical approach to press freedom or the freedom of speech, which of course is the basis of any other freedom. So for Feishade, this is a military constitution. And you see from South Africa's case is a proper democratic constitution, and still it's not perfect. But in Nigeria case, it's a military constitution, and things are still not perfect. So how do you think your country, of course you work with Challenge Institute, how do you think your country can better modify this constitution to accommodate the new realities of Nigerians and the new aspirations of the country?
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. You're very correct, in your analysis of Nigeria's constitution, in the legacy of the military, several years, decades of military in Nigeria. And we unfortunately, after 2 decades of democratic administrations, we still have not been able to make any substantial changes to that document, even though there's been some kinds of movements. But of course, it's essentially the same military heritage that we have continued with as a country. And there's been quite some agitation for constitutional amendments, for referendum, for true federalism and restructuring. Several think tanks, several academics and people in advocacy and the media. And in fact, some politicians have called for Nigerians to come together and come up with the first democratic constitution. And unfortunately, we are not making so much of a headway in that direction yet. But what I think is we need to have more concerted efforts in this direction, because actually in Nigeria, as we know, we still sing in discordant tunes. Not every Nigerian is on the same page. Of course, we cannot have absolute acceptance of any particular idea, but I do not think that we have enough Nigerians speaking out for the need to have a new constitution yet. It appears that some section of the country, quite a large section of the country geographically, seem to want to continue with the military constitution that we have. The southeast corner wants out of the country completely. They don't even want to participate in the discussion for a new constitution. They simply want out. Maybe the southwest and south-south might be the parts where many of us are talking about a new constitution as the solution to the country. And of course, the northern part of the country, the intellectuals from there tend to seem to say that, look, we are fine with what we have. But anybody that studies Nigeria's constitution would realize that this is an unworkable document. And this is where I might disagree a little bit with Ngozi Joyce, with regards to what he was saying about constitutions not working in Africa. It's true that it's not working in Nigeria, but I think that the document itself looks like something that was designed to not work in the first place. So we just need to have the right document, something that came out of the will of the people for real. I mean, Nigeria's constitution starts by saying we the people, have come to agree to work together, following this legal instrument and so on. But we know that this is not really true. The Nigerian people, there's no true representation of Nigerian people coming up to put together that document. It's a legacy of the military, and we need more advocacy and enlightenment in Nigeria to get Nigerians to stand up, to speak out, against that document, to say, look, we need to set up a document that will be fair to the over 250 ethnic nationalities that make up this country. And until we come up with a document that is fair to all concerned, we will continue to have significant challenges in terms of human rights abuses and so on as we currently do.
Right. I mean, I agree with you strongly. Of course, the Constitution is only as comprehensive and popular as much as it accommodates the ethnic differences or the different ethnic realities in any country. But I really want us to come to human rights question proper. We've talked about the Constitution as the basis of any arguments or contemplation on human rights. Now that we've established that it's very much required to have a constitution that cannot be abused by the minority or the majority, and also a constitution that is pretty much democratized, not designed by the military, and even if it was designed by military, updated to accommodate new realities and expectations. So having established that, Rejoice, I want to come to you. As much as we say that majority of the human rights violation we've witnessed in Africa, I mean, Zimbabwe is a classic case, that majority of those abuses were perpetrated by the government. Of course, we know what happened under Mugabe. One of the most horrendous crimes in Zimbabwean history were committed under Mugabe. As much as we blame government for violation of all those rights, we cannot hide from the fact that extremist groups, secessionist groups sometimes often violate human rights as well. They depose people from their land, they kidnap people forcefully, they traffic human beings. But we can challenge the government through the courts, through legal terms. We can organize campaigns. Maliso, FMF, and Charlie are doing remarkable work in keeping your respective governments in check when it comes to human rights. But what about the extremist groups that are violating human rights in unimaginable ways? How do we tackle them, or how do we question or challenge their audacity towards making human rights violations something of the past in our countries? Rejoice.
That's a bit of a problem, because when a nation is grown up in a legacy of violence, it is very easy for extremists to take charge and take root. Because when Africans grow to understand and appreciate the importance of human life, so while I agree with Ibrahim that sometimes the extremist groups tend to misbehave and they are loose cannons, but I think it all boils down to the culture of human rights. Because I think Martin was going to also affirm perhaps that, for instance, in Switzerland and other Nordic countries, children at primary school level begin to learn and appreciate how human rights are important. We cannot afford to have a situation where citizens become vigilantes against extremist groups. But then again, when a government itself is the main perpetrator, it creates a vacuum for rights abuse. So look at all the countries. For instance, in Southern Africa, we have Mozambique. The argument is that around how these governments, military governments and nationalist governments, manage minorities and their demands. You come back to Zimbabwe again, there are pockets of resistance and dissent that are created by bad governance. But it's very difficult to deal with these extremist groups, especially if the effectors are exogenic. This is where perhaps, Ibrahim, the regional cooperation comes in, so that you're able to diffuse these negative sentiments that emerge. But it's largely to do with that home government, that main government failing to create and breed a culture of respect for human rights. It breeds these small pockets of resistance. If, as devolution, as Martin said, if all minorities and sentiments are taken on board, if you design a constitution, Ibrahim, that takes care of minority rights, you are not going to have so much of a problem in terms of dissidents. But I think it still boils down to the ability of African governments to create a culture of constitutionalism and respect for human rights at a very, very tertiary level. By the time we're adults, we should be able to manage ourselves.
I think you're very spot on that. I mean, Nigeria and Cameroon are a classic case of constitutions that do not fully accommodate the aspirations or interests of minority groups. And of course, we know the result in Cameroon right now. The country is flaring up in ethnic or sectarian violence. And with that, we've seen hundreds of people forced to migrate from Cameroon to the borders across Adamawa in Nigeria. And of course, Nigeria itself is experiencing some potential civil distress right now because the minorities, ethnic minorities, are questioning the constitutions for not accommodating their aspirations and views. So I think this is a problem that resonates across the continent. But Martin, I want to come to you. I want to link it with what Rejoice said about ethnic minorities or ethnic secessionists and some of their roles in violation of human rights. Of course, this is not always the case, as you know, for example, not even ethnic minorities anymore. I mean, groups, political agitation groups, pressure groups, or groups that have political interests. For example, the ANC was born out of a separatist group, pretty much, that rose up against the apartheid government. I mean, young folks like Nelson Mandela, Ora Tambo, Desmond Tutu, and the other folks. They were young people, and they were militants. They pursued some guerrilla warfare against the apartheid government, but still, they did not really pretty much abuse human rights. Their core principle was to protect Black lives or Black interests, and that's a classic example of a guerrilla group or a militancy group not violating human rights. But you come to Nigeria today, you go to Cameroon today, majority of the cases are linked to human rights violation. The same case in Liberia, the same case in, I think, Central African Republic, where the Seleka rebels and the Antabaleka are committing horrendous crimes, and in that case, violating human rights. It seems to have changed lately. But I want to link that to the idea that South Africa used to be pretty much the beacon of liberal democracy and constitutionalism on the continent of Africa. But now we're seeing some problems as regards not only to property, as we've discussed, but certain provisions that allow political office holders to violate the Constitution. Classic case, your recent president Jacob Zuma and his crazy corruption charges. It's just surprising that South Africa has come down to this. What happened to the rainbow country? What happened to your liberal democracy, man?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely correct. Our constitution was written in a way for Nelson Mandela, unfortunately, and in that way it vested a lot of power at the center, at the national level in Pretoria, in our capital, and did not federalize enough. It did not devolve enough authority down to regions, and that is a cause of conflict. Now, for instance, the most recent thing that the government is busy with is disarmament of the civilian population. Now, while South Africa does not have ethnic minorities in open revolt against the government, we do have, I believe, the highest rates of violent crime on the continent, certainly, and one of the highest in the world. We regularly have the highest rates of rape and homicide in South Africa. I believe some of our cities regularly are the very highest in the world. And our government, with all its power at the center, has decided to take away the rights of civilians to defend themselves. And now my answer to this conundrum, I guess, is a far more simpler, but I guess a bit more radical than what Rejoice said, even though I agree completely with devolution, taking away a bit of the stakes from the center and diffusing the desire for conflict. But I think before that, we really need to go a long way to ensuring that every law-abiding, peaceful African, but also South Africans, do have the ability to acquire the tools to defend themselves with from ordinary criminals, be they murderers or robbers, and also terrorists and secessionists who would abuse human rights. We cannot have Al-Shabaab, I believe, in Mozambique now, walking into a town and simply mowing down civilians running for their lives. They do need a way to defend themselves. And in South Africa, this right to have a firearm to defend yourself has been relatively well respected for the last few years, and we have had an active civil society self-regulating the use of firearms and promoting the right to self-defense. But that is now coming to an end, and it's a massive tragedy. Rather, we should, this is a lesson we have to learn from the United States, and learn that an armed society could be a polite society, and I think Africa is a very good test case for that, and not simply give those people with political agendas the firearms. They will get them, believe me. We do need to help our ordinary civilians a little bit more.
Right. Faishat, I think what Martin just made clear in many ways speaks to your situation in Nigeria, where on the one hand, pretty much the complaint is more about the centralization of power as provided by the Constitution and the inability of the federal government to truly federalize, the extreme concentration of power in Aso Rock, and pretty much state government being dormant, not to make mention of local governments, but also about how this inability to truly federalize affects laws at the local level. For example, the laws that relates to the right to keep arms. I know for sure before colonialism and before this disruption of our social fabric in Nigeria, people had the right to keep arms. In Yoruba land, you always have cutlass, which was primarily the basic weapon. You have cutlass in each household. Almost in each household, you always have, these Dane guns. Some of them are for hunting, some of them are for personal protection. And the king can never say, you shouldn't have your right to bear arms. In fact, in war times, as you know in history, the king will rally his people, of course, the army, and sometimes ordinary people, farmers and hunters, to bring out their guns and cutlass to fight for the village or the community. But in Nigeria today, that doesn't seem to be the case. And one of the results, I think, is what we've seen in Benue recently, the massacre in Benue, the massacre in Maiduguri, and of course, the massacre in our dear town of Igongon, where people were pretty much killed in cold blood without the ability to defend themselves. So as Martin pointed out, do you think the right to bear arms can in some way help Africans protect themselves from anyone or any agency or separatist group that intend to violate their right?
Well, that's going to be a very dicey one, because especially in the context of Nigeria, I think the fundamental problem with Nigeria since independence in 1960 is the fact that the military rulers have emasculated the people too much. As you know, Nigeria got into this military coup in 1966, and we were into military years until we had a short democratic, the first dispensation between 83 and 85. And then we are back to the military until 1999. And since 1999, we have mostly former military heads of states coming back as democratic rulers. Now, that gives you a picture of Nigeria's military culture. During these many years of being in the military, under military rule, and then having a democratic rule that is led by soldiers, the people of Nigeria have been terribly emasculated. The ideas of them defending themselves is kind of lost in their minds. They've been totally, they've become quite submissive to the government. But recently, there are agitations because now people are tired, and now they're not always completely logical anymore about what they want to do about the situation. And it's very understandable when you understand the long history of loss of, their freedom and everything. So now people are beginning to get arms, they're beginning to get weapons, and they're beginning to turn against each other. So, for example, when we talk about, I like what Rejoice was saying about Al-Shabaab the other time. In Nigeria, the northeast corner, where we talk about terrorism in the northeastern part of Nigeria, to a very large extent, it's a kind of secessionist, movement, because what they really want is an Islamic state. That's why we have Islamic State of West Africa now. Of course, they're going about it as terrorists, which is what they are. But again, when you look at what is going on, those guys want an Islamic state. They don't want to be part of the secular Nigerian country. And then when you look at what is happening in Southeast Nigeria, the Biafrans, they want out also. And also, they are also getting harmed. And there's beginning to be crisis, UGM killings and things like that. And of course, the government's response is more military firepower to quell everybody down. We're talking about shooting protesters and all these kinds of things. So it's talking about giving Nigerians, allowing them more freedom to defend themselves with more ammunition at this point is very, very dicey. We are already in a very explosive situation. In as much as this is the fundamental right of the country, you can imagine how difficult it can be, because we have Fulani kidnapping scenario and all these things going on at the same time. But in any case, two wrongs don't make a right. Since the people have the fundamental freedom, and I believe that it should still be allowed, maybe with regulations like the registration of the licensing of guns and things like that. But the government and appropriate regulatory authorities that can also include private non-governmental organizations will need to do a lot of work to ensure that the arm bearing is put under, is well monitored and people are using them responsibly and so on. But whichever way one wants to look at it is pretty dicey, because we've gone too far, lost in the woods already as it is currently. And I will blame it really on the long years of military rule and the continued military legacy that is represented by our current constitution, and also by the fact that we are mostly led by former soldiers who are wearing, agbada, as we call it. They are wearing, civilian clothes, plain clothes.
Right. As you said, it's pretty much a divisive and dicey contemplation. Do we allow people to bear arms to curb these incessant killings, or do we not? It's a question of value, isn't it? And of course, I want to bring this, and I'm still going to stay with you, Faye, because your organization, the Chale Institute, has done remarkably well in educating Africans about their indigenous values and how those values are the true and only way out for Africans towards prosperity and perhaps security. And you cannot talk about African values without talking about the right to bear arms or the right to defend yourself, frankly. I just want to know, in a very comprehensive way, our value systems have been corroded by colonialism, of course, and this idea of copying what is obtainable in the West, our political systems and social structures are pretty much designed alongside what is obtainable in the West. But of course, we cannot run away from the idea of borrowing from foreign countries to modify what we have. In the same way, we cannot run away completely from what we have by dwelling 100% on what we borrow from the foreign countries. So how do we strike a balance culturally, Faye? And if you can help answer that really quick in 1 minute, because we're pretty much running out of time, and I want to get back to Martin and Rejoice.
Okay, so I think that culture is dynamic. This is one of the things I think Nigerians need to, we need to remind ourselves about, the fact that culture is dynamic, which means it varies not just from place to place, but it also changes from time to time. So we don't necessarily have to be stuck on ancient traditions that did not work, because the truth is, it's not every ancient tradition in Africa that worked, effectively. There were some of them that were counterproductive, and there were some of them that were great and beautiful. And I think the idea of culture is to cultivate those ones that worked, that are beautiful, and that can be carried forward into a modern society. So we are in a modern society. We need to modernize. We need to do the great things that our ancestors did in modern context. And where we can learn from the West, we should imbibe those things. And most of the ideas, when we talk of ideas of liberty and so on, they are not Western ideas. They are universal ideas. We had those ideas on the continent of Africa, just as they had it in the West. And we also had the opposite ideas, to some extent also in Africa. So our job is to ensure that the ideas of liberty and freedom and these good ideas win ultimately in this battle between, between freedom and serfdom.
Oh, brilliant. Rejoice, I'm a big fan of yours and your organization, particularly because you do not shy to talk about issues that are not always talked about by civil societies. And one of the things you highlighted before we came on air was your idea of the idea of what you called homophobic antagonism in Africa. And of course, that's a another divisive issue in Africa. And of course, it relates back to the question of value and social values, rather. So particularly looking at governments in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe, but in recent times, looking at countries in Eastern Africa like Uganda and the Museveni government, and how they've, in many, many ways, demonized individual right to gender identity or sexual identity. And this is one question we do not often talk about on the continent, but you don't too much shy away from that. Of course, it goes back to the idea of human rights violation. People should have the right to identify the way they want to identify, insofar they do not hurt other people, Rejoice. So what do you think civil societies or think tanks like yours, like FMF, like the Chale Institute, and many of our friends on the continent can help better include gender rights or sexual orientation rights in our advocacy on the continent? Rejoice.
I think once civil society manages to persuade citizenry and the population that rights must be defended as their rights, it's important not to start creating exclusive, crevices of conservative, excitement around, driven largely by religion and traditionalists. Ibrahim, we need to accept, the principle of protecting human rights is one. It doesn't matter what the rights are. And once civil society manages to create a momentum around that, I think we won the battle, Ibrahim.
Brilliant. Martin, I'm going to come to you. I was looking at the recent Human Freedom Index written by our friends at Cato and Fraser, particularly in Vasquez and Fred McMahon. And in their rankings of your countries, Nigeria was ranked 131st among 162 countries. Zimbabwe was 141st among 162. Of course, South Africa is okay at 68 on 162. Besides South Africa, Nigeria and Zimbabwe are not performing, very, very well. But I'm going to come to Martin, and my question would be about the idea of storytelling. Maybe that's one of the things that have contributed to your country's kind of encouraging ranking or placement on this index. So the FMF, as I understand, has a remarkable project I encourage anybody to check out. It's called the Kaya Lamp Project, and it's enshrined in the idea of property rights, giving people the rights to own land. Of course, in Africa, we value land more than majority of things. Land brings life, it brings family, it brings generation. So I'm just so into the idea of storytelling in Kailam, the amount of time the FMF gives to going into people's houses, hearing them out, bringing their stories into the public, and putting their story before the government. And now those stories has really helped you achieve remarkable results with the project. Perhaps you want to talk a little bit about that project and how you think it could be central to our conversation about human rights.
Yeah, no, of course. Advocacy for freedom requires storytelling, and that's why I like the exchange that you just had about systems of governance from pre-colonial times. And before I get to property rights and Kaya Lama, I think that's a good story to tell. In that, in various places around Africa, political decisions were made through consensus, and that's a source of freedom that we can tell stories about, and that. The narrative method has been the way that African history has, for the most part, been recorded before colonial times and to a large extent during that unfortunate period. And we need to retell these stories, taking into account the value of liberty and the values of property rights, so that we can link the fundamental value of freedom to this method of consensus decision making. And I mean, you just mentioned the very important role that land plays truly in all African societies. And with Kaya Lam, our project, we do lean heavily on talking about that role that having a plot to call your own plays in escaping from poverty, in joining the middle class, in becoming a productive member of society, and becoming a real citizen of society rather than a beggar and a dependent upon the state. And one of some of the stories that stand out are people who have lived in their houses for generations, people who turn 100, but they've never had ownership of that property. Could they ever say it was theirs, truly?
Right.
But the moment Kaya Lam came about and said, here is your title deed, you are now the owner, you can now leave this to your children and they will invest in it and they will be prosperous. That is incredibly powerful. And the moment we as freedom fighters really get away from the obsession with figures and graphs and data and really excel at telling these stories, I think we're going to make short work of authoritarianism and anti-libertarian stances on the African continent.
Wow, isn't that beautiful? You just made me so happy as a historian, as somebody that do storytelling for a living. It's really awesome to see you highlight that. But Feishade, if you can just help us, clarify this within a minute because we're pretty much running out of time. You are a big advocate of the idea of education, human rights education, and how things must start from the scratch. It must begin by education. And of course, I'm a big advocate of the decolonization of the knowledge space in Africa. So how do you think, or why do you think we need to go back to education, first of all? I mean, we have all these challenges. We have to send militaries to go and secure borders to make sure villages do not fight one another. We have to make sure we focus on the courts so that civil rights cases can move forward. But why do we have to spend time on education?
Okay, so, we're building a society, right? So you want to use something that everybody has in common. You're in a multicultural society, multi-religious society, but what do we all have in common? It's the curriculum. It's what everybody goes to learn from primary school through secondary to university. That's what everybody definitely has in common as far as, what goes into the mind is concerned, okay? There could be differences in the religious and all these other places, but at least we have something that hopefully there should be something uniform about what gets into the minds of people. And just like Martin just said about storytelling and narratives, that's something that you get from schools also. So now, when you look at some of the human rights abuses and the problems on the continent, you begin to question especially when you look at what some of the educated people also do, and some of the things that we permit, that we allow, that we find permissible. You begin to question, what did people learn when they go to schools? Mm-hmm. And if you go that far and you look at some of our curriculum, you'll be amazed what has gone wrong. In some cases, you have history removed from curriculum. People don't learn the history of their country. In a place like Nigeria, it looks like we deliberately want Nigerians to forget that some people dictate us in the past.
Right.
So we need to go look at the history of human rights abuses, for example, in Nigeria. Mm-hmm. We need children to learn these stories and also to be told in the right context and in the right narrative. I don't know if I have time. There's a story that I read in an English...
We're pretty much running out of time, and I would have loved you to narrate that story, as somebody that do storytelling. But I just want Rejoice to have the last salvo. So Rejoice, you often highlight as a senior colleague in the movement in Africa that think tanks needs to do more when it comes to advocacy and including some often neglected issues in the advocacy, not only focusing on economic rights or challenging the government as regards to democracy, but also focusing on the lesser talked about problems. So in like 20 seconds, Rejoice, what do you advise our colleagues to emulate when it comes to inclusivity of topics in their advocacy?
Absolutely. I think continental collaborations, Ibrahim, are very important because we have comparative advantage. We can share with each other expertise and be able to create some critical leverage to influence the way institutions manage human rights in Africa.
Oh, brilliant. Gentlemen, that was so awesome. I really appreciate your take. And we want to thank everyone for joining us for the Africa Liberty Forum this year, and also to express gratitude to our co-hosts, Center for Development and Enterprises Great Lakes, for all they did to make this forum a success. We'll have more information soon about the 2022 Africa Liberty Forum, so please be on the lookout. Also, I do hope that you can plan to join us in Miami for our annual Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner, which will take place in person and online on Monday, Tuesday, December 13 and 14, 2021. And finally, as we learn to adapt to this new hybrid world, we want to learn as much as we can about your virtual experience. So you receive an event survey in your email, and we'll love to hear from you about your thoughts and how we can continue to improve in the future. So thank you again, and we'll see you soon. Odabo.